People present are Ryan Key, Scott McCurry, did I get it right, Scott? Scuddy Walker, Andy Smith, and Emily Hitchcock. We have a quorum. The first item of business is the approval of the minutes. Do I have a motion?
I make a motion. Second.
Okay. Motion by Ryan, second by Scott. Any discussion? Hearing no discussion, we'll have a vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. It passes unanimously. The second item is the treasurer's report. As we may all recall, Laura Havron has resigned from the board, and so Andy Smith will read the treasurer's report for us today.
Very good. So this is the treasurer's report for the local government investment pool for the period ending November 30th, 2022 month. Opening balance was $282,252.60. There were deposits of reinvestment interest of $913.93. There were no expenditures. The balance in the account as of period ending date, $283,166.53. And you know, there's a new sheet that I'm not used to. Do you want me to read this sheet?
No,
Okay.
it's just the explanation.
Okay, gotcha. So this is the treasurer's report for the Community First Bank account, period ending November 30th, 2022. Month opening balance was $4,041. Total deposits none. Total expenditures none, for a balance ending of $4,041.00. That's it.
Okay, do I have a motion to approve the treasurer's report? Scott? A second?
I'll second.
Ryan? Okay. Motion by Scott, second by Ryan. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. The next item is the fundraising and public relations report. Ryan, is any activity?
There's no
No activity and no new donations? Okay. The next item is the grant status report. Scuddy?
There's no changes in the grants.
Okay. The next item is the status of the board vacancies. As we know, Scott is a new member. Welcome. And unfortunately, Laura has resigned. And just so everyone knows, I believe she's having her knee replacement surgery today. So everyone keep her in your thoughts. That means we have two vacancies. One's at large and one is the District 1. I believe that Laura has been talking to her council person about a potential applicant for that position, but I encourage everyone to try to talk to folks and find folks who may be interested. It's very important that we get all of them filled, because although Andy was right, a quorum is only 4. We're very tight when we only have 5 members in terms of having a quorum. The next item of business is the policy 003, grant procedures. These revisions were done for 2 reasons. The first one was that we had made the changes, we had requested and the council approved changes to the our enabling ordinance, and it now requires, the big requirement was that if you're going to request funding for a fee simple purchase, you have to simultaneously put a conservation value on it. I mean, a conservation easement on it. And that is to, there were multiple reasons for that. That with Scott, the county doesn't have the manpower to monitor, and if there's a conservation easement, there's a third party that monitors to make sure it. And the other thing is that then there become issues with transfers and things like that related to the fee title. There were other minor changes, and in addition, David Root had informed me after a conference call with Natural Land Trust that the language we were currently requiring to be in the deed, if it was a fee simple purchase, had some language in it that would, this is on page 6 of the policy, that needed to be deleted because we did not have the authority or power, the county did not, to require that. That was the portion that said that they had to adopt all policies adopted in the future. And he said, we cannot do that. But the requirement that...
Can you explain that?
Okay, we were requiring that the deeds, and we still require that the deeds acknowledge that the property was purchased, the fee simple property was going to be purchased with funds, in part at least, from the Oconee County Conservation Bank Board, and therefore it must be kept in conservation, used for conservation purposes in perpetuity. Okay, and the ordinance provides those extreme circumstances, if there's a condemnation or something, how you handle getting a substitute property. That's what it's designed to do. And so that language is still in there, but we'd also included that that the owners had to comply with all policies, which meant that if the fee simple was going to be transferred to another entity, that they would have to comply with, that everyone would have to comply with new policies and ongoing. And David, as the county attorney, advised that the county cannot require that.
Then what's the point in us saying that we have to have a conservation easement?
Because they still have to comply with the ordinance.
So
Our policy, we can't make them comply with our policies, but the ordinance requires that it be in a conservation, to be held for conservation purpose.
Okay,
So it's new policies that they don't have to comply with. Right?
Yes.
They have to comply with the policies that were in place at the time that they did the transfer.
that's what I'm wanting to make sure.
Okay.
They always have to comply with the ordinance, right?
They always have to comply with the ordinance, and our policies cannot change the ordinance.
Right.
So the only thing our policies can do is, like, for example, let's take, for example, the fee simple purchase. We have funded, in part, some fee simple purchase that do not have a conservation easement on them. The ordinance now requires for future purchases that there has to be a conservation easement, but it cannot retroactively require that, nor can our policies. Our policy is going to require it. And so what will
What
happen
we've already funded can't be,
cannot be, and so it's the same concept. We can't revise policies as the ordinance may be revised and slip in requiring something new.
so the language we had in the deed at the time of the transfer that required us to approve it is basically non-enforceable?
No, that's in the ordinance. We must,
Okay.
that is in the
Okay.
ordinance and has been from the very first day.
Okay.
So we have to approve it. And so this, I don't know why it was, well, I do know why it was such a big deal. It was a big deal because the people who were upset about all the procedures we had established. And David had also advised me.
Who were the people that were upset about it?
It was Natural Land Trust. You know, they've got a property that they want to transfer to the Forest Service, which is an eligible recipient, so they can do that. But the Forest Service has issues related to what can be in a deed.
Yeah, they won't sign a conservation easement.
I know. And I don't know what the status of that is, because they do have language in the deed, not this language that we had in our policy, but they had a language recognizing the ordinance, and that will have to be in the new deed, so.
So let me ask you, Emily, so we've got a policy that says that if there's a subsequent transfer, we have the right to approve that. They have to
Okay,
come to us for
okay.
approval.
To catch you up first, our subsequent transfer policy was vacated
Oh, how's that?
after I met with David, because he felt that there were things in it, such as that we could not do. And he strongly suggested that we revise and make it much, much shorter, and you will see it today.
Okay.
And if anyone doesn't have, needs more time today to look at either this policy or the 0005,
I see.
there's no rush to adopt it today. We don't want to do it till everyone's comfortable.
So we don't have that right to
No,
deny a subsequent transfer?
when Natural Land Trust, using that as example, when the entity that purchased it today with our funds transfers it, we have the right to approve that transfer. But we do not have the right to approve transfers down the road.
Ever?
Apparently not. And that was an open question for me that I had asked David about, and apparently he and I had a misunderstanding. He thought I was asking about the first transfer, and I was asking about subsequent transfers. So our policy had written what I thought was the advice from David,
I understand.
but he informed me that that was not.
Let me ask you a follow-up question. So, when a conservation property comes to us, we take their application process, we say, oh yeah, it's got the values we want, we approve the expenditure of our money to help them do whatever transfer they're doing, whether it's a conservation easement or a fee simple. In your opinion, do we have the ability, so we say either with the conservation easement or more particularly with a fee simple transfer, they've got to comply with our ordinance. But what's that really mean? Does it mean that when they were approved, these three qualities were the qualities we liked, the conservation values we liked? You know, there were streams there were wetlands there was wonderful scenic values.
Mm-hmm.
Do they have to hold, I mean, if they degrade those conservation values,
Yeah.
what can we do? Or is that what they have to maintain, is compliance with or maintain those conservation values?
They have
that
to
came in?
maintain the conservation values, and this illustrates the issue where it's fee simple, and is the reason we're not doing, where we made the change, because if there's not a conservation easement on it, you have this vague idea of what is the conservation for this purpose that's set out kind of in the application and our evaluation, and that's it. Whereas a conservation easement, as we know, is very, very precise and detailed, and tells exactly what the conservation, what has to be preserved and what can and cannot be done in order to preserve those conservation benefits. So the county does have the power under the ordinance to enforce that, whether it's a conservation easement or a fee simple, that the conservation purposes are being put forward. But as I said, the county really does not have the ability to do the kind of enforcement that these land trusts that hold conservation easements can do.
So just following up then, so let's say we've approved a fee simple transfer, it occurs, let's say that new owner doesn't maintain those conservation values.
Now, you're talking about one previous to today,
Yes.
okay? Then we would have to, we'd have to request the county, if we thought there was reason to think it wasn't being preserved, to request the county to go out and do an inspection and make a determination as to whether or not the conservation values were being degraded, and send, I guess, through the, I would have to ask, I think county council then would have to get our recommendation, who would discuss with David Root whether or not there was sufficient evidence to bring an action or to.
Okay, all right, that's good, like that.
I have not asked David for the process because I can't anticipate it
Well,
happening.
we don't have to worry about the process, but
Yeah.
just best case scenario, the county could do that. So let's just follow one more step. So let's say that owner that we approve that transfer, transfers it again. Is the same thing true for that second owner that we weren't involved with? Can the county go in
Okay.
and tell them, hey, dude, you gotta,
Yes.
you're not
Now-
maintaining the values.
I've not asked David that particular specific question in those words, but because they have acknowledged in the deed that they have to comply with the ordinance, and the ordinance says that whoever owns it must keep it for the conservation purposes in perpetuity, and the county's rights are attendant with that obligation, yes.
Okay, and really, the way we're solving that problem is from here on out, requiring a conservation easement.
Yes. So we have got, I have to look at our grant status report and see how many fee simples we had. We've got 4 fee simples that do not have a conservation easement that were approved. And one of them is Oconee Town, which is currently owned by the state of South Carolina.
Right.
And I thought that they might have put a conservation easement on it retroactively. I mean, after
Sure.
the acquisition, but I could be wrong. And the other 3 are the ones owned by Natural Land Trust.
Right.
So they're a relatively small number that this issue will apply to going forward.
Right, okay, gotcha.
But they're big tracks. And
They are
Yeah, they
big
were-
tracks and very
They're big
important
money.
tracks.
Big involvement we
I
have.
agree.
Yes, and they're very, very important tracks. They total, let's see, this one's almost 200, this one's 238, and this one's 155, so that's 2, 4, about 600 acres total?
Yeah.
And that's in 3 of them. That doesn't count the 55 acres for Oconee Town. That's the 3 Natural Land Trust. So yes, that's a significant number of acres.
Okay, thanks.
And that does, one of the things that I also want to bring your attention to is I did this, and I did it in part based on what happened with the Crawford Mill property. Scott, for background, Crawford Mill was a fee simple purchase where they put a conservation easement on at the same time. And what they did, I think they asked for fee simple funding, but they used the conservation easement as the conservation value, which only makes sense because you've got an appraiser that says this is the conservation value. So I think in essence, so that's what I did under the definition of conservation value. Before, the statute said that if it was a fee simple purchase, that the conservation value was the fee simple value, but there wasn't going to be a conservation easement on it. So I felt like we had to make that change, and let me tell you, I did not go back and double check the ordinance. I need to do that. I'll make a note to myself to make sure I got that change in the ordinance too, or that we did when we sent it forward, because I know nobody besides me remembers at this point. That was
You got that
months
right.
ago. So I will double check that. I do not want a staff to go back to county council again, but I think that's important. And that may be a.
Jennifer, could you flip back to that page 1? Right, okay, yeah, okay.
Yeah, you see?
Yeah.
Okay. So with all of this discussion, before I call for a motion, let me ask if anybody wants additional time to study this before we vote on it. Scott does, okay. So Jennifer, can you make a note to put it on the agenda for February? Okay, thank you.
Scott,
Okay.
what's your last name?
McCurry. Is there any way we could get David Root here for a little explanation, or maybe I could just schedule a time to talk to him?
Well, we're actually not supposed to just individual members schedule a time to talk to him, because if every commission and board in the county did that, so, requests for advice have to come through. As chair, I might be able to. I think I can, but normally what I will do is I'll check with Amanda and see if it's okay for me to ask him, or if she needs to ask him if he can make an appearance to talk to us about these
I
issues.
think this is pretty important.
It is very,
I
very
think it
important.
deserves his time.
I mean, we can
Yes.
authorize two people to go in and meet with him to discuss
Yeah, but
it.
he, from an administrative standpoint, he is the attorney for the county, i.e. the county council. So administratively, they don't want every single person who works for the county or sits on a board or commission to just wander into David's office in ones or twos or threes or whatever and say, hey, I've got a legal question. There's a process to get questions to him so that he can do his workload.
I think as a whole, for all of us, I think it'd be best for him to come in
Yeah.
and talk
Yes,
to
good thought.
us.
Just a brief, I mean, I'm not talking about.
Explanation.
Yes, I think it will be very brief, and I know he'll be willing to. He spent a great deal of time on the phone, and,
I mean, this has been discussed at length. I know this is nothing like, but yeah, I think it.
but it is difficult for y'all particularly when you ask a question, and I have to say, well, David said, or I haven't asked David the answer, but he is our attorney, and so what he says is what binds us, and so,
Well, if he would prefer not to come in here, I would nominate you and Andy to,
Dave, Jennifer, can you check with David and tell him and if we need to go through Amanda? I think that if we just request him to come in and tell him if he has any questions about the specific questions that came up, that he can call me, or, you can kind of look at the questions on the thing, but if you would do that. Or he can, if he says for me to send him an email, I will sit down and maybe look at this meeting and go through and give him
Yeah,
some concrete questions so he'll know what to prepare,
exactly.
Sure.
okay? Let me make a note
Good
for
idea.
myself to do that.
Way to go, Scott. That's a good idea.
Okay, and I know he'll do it. We all know he's great, but he does have to manage his time.
Yeah, needs to be focused.
Okay, now, as I had mentioned to Andy and Scott, for your information, as you just heard, the ordinance does require that the interest that is funded can only be transferred to another eligible recipient, and only with the approval of the board, and that's in the ordinance. So if it's a conservation easement that's transferred, they can sell the property all they want to without telling the board. But if it's the conservation easement, let's say Soil and Water holds the conservation easement, they're going to transfer it to Upstate Forever. And those are two people who hold conservation easements that we've given them money to. Then they would have to come and tell us. So following David's advice, I came up with a one-page thing that basically reminds everyone that under the ordinance, you have to do this. And I use the language from the ordinance because it says an interest in land obtained with our funds may be assigned from one eligible recipient to another upon approval of the board. And I personally think there's an open question about whether that is a one-time or multiple, but that's, this is what the ordinance says, folks. Read it. And then, instead of having the form that I had developed and all of that, I just said, send us a request in writing. Let's make it simple. You send us a request, and we've got to know at a minimum who the new entity is, who their contact is, what the property is. I don't think I included identification of the property. So at a minimum, we're going to have to look at this again next month, identification of property.
Let me mention too, you see number 3?
I'm looking at in item number 2. It says the request for.
I got that, I'm just directing you somewhere else.
Okay, well, and I said the approximate date of closing because I want to encourage them, closing dates can move. I want to encourage them to ask us early.
Yeah.
And then in number 3, you'll see, it says that we encourage it to do it 6 months in advance so we can do our due diligence. If, for example, it was Soil and Water and it was going to Upstate Forever, we have minimal due diligence because Upstate Forever is in here so often that we are doing due diligence on them. But if it was a new entity that, for example, the Chattooga Conservancy is now a land trust and can hold conservation easements. So if it was that entity, at this point, we've never given them a grant. So we would have to do the same kind of initial due diligence that the first time, and then if with every application that kind of, just kind of affirm our due diligence.
When did Chattooga Conservancy get that status?
Oh, they've been a land trust. They've been
few
an
years.
accredited land trust probably for 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, it's
that
nothing
long?
new. I didn't think that was real.
And I did a conservation easement for them, or reviewed one probably 15 years ago.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Really?
And
I
then-
thought it was that they'd only been accredited 2 or 3. But anyway,
No,
yeah.
I wasn't trying to correct you. I was just.
Yeah.
Oh,
I didn't know it either until recently.
Yeah.
Andy, however.
Yeah. It may be 3 years ago. I know Taylor Howard was their attorney, and that got them through that process.
Yeah.
So it's probably 3 years, yeah.
Yeah.
They've been accredited by the land trust.
Well, you know, I was trying to think, I was talking to Krista, and she may have said that they're coming up for renewal. It may have been that long. I don't remember.
So on
But
number-
anyway, so that's the reason, and I want them to understand, it's okay if the closing date moves. It does, folks, that's life. If you wait till the very last minute, we may not have a meeting scheduled, we may not have time to do our due diligence.
may not have money.
Well, we wouldn't need money with a transfer. This
Yeah,
is just for the
that's right.
transfer. And of course, the reason we have to put this in here is because with the initial applications, the statute tells us what our deadlines are. But it doesn't tell us for this one. So, and then,
You got grammatical errors in number 3.
okay, if you will,
You got in the second line, you got a space between the 2 and the.
oh, yes, okay,
And then you left the C is off of closing date.
okay.
It is a losing day.
Huh?
It could be.
Somebody's losing.
Somebody's.
Yeah, okay. And if anyone sees any more typos or just has anything else, please let me know. Number 4, y'all think about this. I said approval will be valid for 1 year because the application is valid for 1 year and potentially has 1 6-month extension. Now, we could do that, the approval was valid for 6 months, but if it has to change, I wanted them,
Why would we put a limit on this? Because, I mean, this is different from the application
Yeah,
process.
it is.
This is just transferring it from one eligible entity to another. If we approve them, I mean, why should there be an end to it?
okay?
That's what I'm curious about, why put a limit on that whenever, now, if they want to give it up after a year, if they don't want it to begin with, that's one thing. But
Yeah.
if they're, I'm good with just taking it and maintaining it, why say that we have to reevaluate them after a year?
Okay?
I mean, once we've approved them, we've said, you're good.
Yeah.
Go ye therefore and do whatever you want to do. You're fine.
And so you think we can say,
That's the case with every, I mean, isn't that the case across the board?
Yeah.
Anyway?
I mean, if they're eligible,
Once they're
they've
eligible.
come in, we
Yeah.
know them, they're good, nothing changes. I mean, if they start shooting up people.
okay, should I say will be valid, okay,
I think you could just take it out.
okay,
We've approved it. Go ye therefore do whatever you want to do.
uh-huh.
But
Well,
I
so
think,
I'll just say something about board will notify, I'll substitute will notify once approved or something.
Yeah, and then I would say on number 5, which would now be number 4, I would say the grant recipient must notify the board when the transfer is.
My reason for not saying must is because I don't know if we can since it's not in the ordinance. But I can check with David on that. Because I agree with you. We want it for our records. So I'll ask David.
Yeah, okay.
David really is the grand poobah of this whole.
Yes, he is. When it comes to legal questions about do we have the power?
No wonder he doesn't have time to meet when we have all these questions.
And as he keeps telling me, every time I talk to him is, he said, I'm glad to provide legal advice. That's my job, but y'all still sure do a lot of work. So
So we're gonna table it or are we gonna go ahead and approve this with these changes?
I would suggest that we wait. I need to talk to David. I'll do the revisions, and y'all will see it again, and let's make sure that we've all had time to think about it and make sure that this is all of the changes.
All right.
But as I said, there's no rush. Under the ordinance, if anybody wants to transfer, they have to come to us regardless, whether we have a policy or not. Jennifer, if you would make a note to add it to the 05 to the next agenda. Thank you. Now, any other discussion about those? We don't have a motion on either of them, but if there's just discussion,
No, ma'am.
okay. The Ag Task Force update, I don't know if Rex has any more information than I did. I participated by telephone at the last meeting, and my phone connection was extremely poor. But they are moving forward, and there are some draft recommendations that will be considered at the next meeting, which will be next week. And those recommendations, I believe, will include a recommendation to find a stream of funding for the OCCB that may be limited to just farmland, because that is the Ag Force. But I don't know, frankly. Lisa sent me the draft, sent everyone a draft and asked for comments, and I don't have the updated draft. And I did not have time to look at the other one before her deadline because I was having surgery.
And
But
when's that next meeting of the task force?
I believe it's the 19th. If I can find my calendar, I can tell you for sure.
Right here?
Yes, it should be in council chambers.
What time, do we know?
I'll tell you in a second. Let me look here.
And you're on that task force, right?
Yes, mm-hmm.
Rex, are you on that task force? Okay.
Oh, what is wrong with the light on my phone? I'm sorry, folks, I can't read my phone.
So there's an ag task force and there's an ag board?
Yes. Mhm.
Yep, just like us, yeah.
Yeah.
Corollary.
And the chair of the Ag Board is on the task force.
Okay.
Is that
So-
you?
No, sir. Kim Alexander. Excuse me.
Okay, let's see. I can't, why am my phone is not lighting up?
Do you know when the
It looks like
task
it is
force
10
meeting
a.m. and it is the 19th. What?
At what time?
10 a.m. And
Thank
it
you.
goes from 10 to 12.
All right.
And we pretty much use every minute but get out on time.
As opposed to us, we don't have a back end time.
No, we don't. But we're usually pretty quick unless we have an application.
Yeah.
Andy, you missed it. Our last meeting was 15 minutes.
Wow.
Glorious.
And we're not going to make it this time, but we're going to be close.
That's great.
Okay, a couple of things before we adjourn. I want to remind everyone that we will have the election of officers at the next meeting.
Okay.
I would ask the existing officers to contact Jennifer if they are not willing to serve again. And I would ask everyone to consider who should be the treasurer. I did not schedule the election of a new treasurer with Laura's absence today because we do the elections at the next meeting anyway.
I'd be happy to serve in that position.
Okay? I will put that down to nominate you as a slate.
If you'll have me.
Yes, if the board will elect you, okay. And what my plan is that I will come forward with a slate of officers, and of course, anybody else can nominate anyone else. The slate does not have to be approved. It's just our numbers are small. Okay, the next meeting will be February the 7th at 9 a.m. in this room. So, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion.
What?
Yes.
Okay, Motion by Andy, second by Ryan, and